Okay, hello everyone. We're now going to do chapter 14 in one section, and we're going to focus on marriage, lifestyle, and families. Okay, this first little chart shows that having children impacts on parents. Parents, of course, impact on children, and children impact on the relationship between the parents. We are having many more people remain single. In fact, they're choosing to remain single. We are having more people move in together. We see this phenomenon among older adults particularly. Many of these avoid marriage because they can lose the benefits they may have through a deceased spouse, like their insurance or their pensions. We know within a 5-year span, about half of cohabitating adults marry. 40% will split up and 10% will continue to cohabit. Note the abrupt increase in cohabitation in the late 70s. This was due primarily to one thing, and that was the availability of effective female contraception, i.e. the pill. Now both males and females are getting older before they get married. We suspect this is due to people completing their college degrees. We are having fewer children, and we're older before we have children. Divorce peaks about between 7 and 8 years of marriage. This has been a pretty stable statistic since we started keeping statistics on this. Remarriage, harder, takes a lot of work. It gets even harder if there are children involved. Now I want to spend some time talking about parenting styles. This grid divides us into 4 groups. At the top of the grid are parents who are either accepting of their children as individuals or unaccepting. Children are essentially extensions of their parents. On the left side of the grid, parents are also divided as to whether they have rules and guidelines, if they're important, or whether they're not important. The authoritarian parent, they have rules, but they don't respond to their children as individuals or even consider the larger picture and misbehavior. They can be rigid and unyielding and say things like, as long as you're putting your feet under my table, it's my way or the highway. They may have the same rules for all their children, regardless of ages or personality differences. This group tends to rely on corporal punishment. Children raised in these households tend toward depression. Their drug of choice is alcohol. Now, neglectful parents tend to be uninvolved with their children. They have or they may enforce rules only if the child's getting on their nerves. These parents may have mental health issues and or drug problems themselves. Children coming from these settings are likely to exhibit a variety of behavioral and emotional problems. Their drug of choice tends to be more powerful street drugs. We have noted that some of these children actually behave better for their teachers than they do for their parents. Teachers tend to be consistent. They often are offering praise and kindness, and teachers make sure the children are fed. Now, authoritative parents have rules, but they do see their children as individuals. These parents may have different rules for one child who has demonstrated responsibility and another child who still needs more structure and guidance. Punishment is designed to help the child understand the problematic behavior and prevent the behavior from reoccurring. A variety of responses to problem behaviors are employed. Children coming from these homes tend to be reasonably well adjusted. Their drug of choice is occasional recreational, milder drugs and or alcohol. Now, indulgent parents have few rules, and they don't expect anyone else to either. They can be difficult for others, schools, neighborhoods, to interact with. We say in the schools that these parents come in not as parents, but as their child's attorney. They often seek out medical or educational exceptionality to use as the reason why their child should be excused from behavioral and academic requirements. They can be excessively demanding on teacher time. We tell teachers to be very careful of anything they put in writing to these parents. We tell them not to meet with the parents by themselves. They need a bad cop to say no to any unrealistic demands these parents will make. As you might expect, these children have difficulties relating to authorities and with their peer relationships. These are the children who will try to change the rules of a game midstream so that they can win. Their drug of choice tends to be more expensive designer drugs. Now, this is just a chart that summarizes a lot of what I have just said in a slightly different format. Okay, this is a chart that's summarizing different forms of child abuse, including neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is the most difficult to prove, but it is probably the most damaging. Types of emotional abuse include ignoring a child. Sometimes these parents will provide for basic needs, but they don't interact with the child or allow other families to interact. When parents are rejecting, they may tell a child they wish the child had never been born. In the case of Johnny Cash, he was often told by his father that he wished Johnny had died instead of his older brother. Isolating is segregating a child physically. In one of the worst cases, Jeannie Wiley was kept in a small dark room, often tied to a potty chair from age 20 months to age 13. She would be beaten if she made any kind of sound. Once rescued, she made some modest language gains but continued to have significant functional delays. Terrorizing is the most common form of emotional abuse. A child is threatened and intimidated and exposed to violence. The parent may destroy a child's possession, may even kill the child's pet in front of them. Corruption is exposing the child to activities grossly inappropriate for a child. Pornography is one of the most common forms of corruption. Teaching your 2-year-old to smoke would be another example. Not surprisingly, children who have been abused have a range of problems, including behavioral problems, difficulties with peer relationships, academic difficulties, and a wide variety of emotional problems. Our next topic is divorce. At one time, it was thought that divorce was the worst thing that could happen to a child, but studies have not supported this in all situations. Divorce is a risk factor for adjustment problems in children. Otherwise well-adjusted children may do relatively well, especially if conflict reduces and if the parents can remain respectful of each other. As you might suspect, children who are more fragile prior to the divorce will have more problems than children who are well-adjusted. The U.S. has a significant number of children being raised in single-parent households. Concerns include higher levels of poverty, lack of parental resources, and lack of a role model. The last slide in this chapter is on grandparenting. They're a source of support. Personal advice. I can tell you if you are a new mother and your baby has an issue, the first person you will call is your own mother. Grandparents can help with child care. They may also help with financial support, and this goes for both single parents and dual parent households. There has been an increase in grandparents raising grandchildren, in part related to financial stresses and in part related to the opioid crisis. As I said, this is the last slide for this chapter. The next chapter is 15, and it is on peers.